Hi, I am Hercule Poirot, and welcome to my new mystery case.
The snow had begun to fall again, thin and silent, as though the heavens themselves wished not to disturb the tranquility of the English countryside below. It lay across the grounds of Winterton Hall in a pristine sheet, broken only by the occasional footprint of a wandering servant or the dark cut of a carriage wheel. The great estate, usually a picture of festive hospitality during the holiday season, seemed this year to smile only with reluctance. Inside, the atmosphere was warmer yet no less strained. Winterton Hall glowed with firelight and richly scented candles, hundreds of them placed with near religious devotion throughout the home. The mistress of the house, Lady Eleanor Winterton, was famed for her annual holiday candle gathering, a tradition stretching back to her grandmother's time. Each year, she selected one candle from the family's historic collection to light at the stroke of 7, a ceremonial act meant to usher in peace and goodwill. But tonight, unbeknownst to the cheerful guests assembled in the drawing room, peace was precisely what Winterton Hall lacked. The clock chimed 6:30, a soft metallic note that seemed to ripple across the room. Among the guests were society figures of the sort one might expect at such a function. The ambitious Member of Parliament, Roland Ashbury, nursing a private scandal beneath his polished veneer; the widowed but sharp-eyed Mrs. Beatrice Longcross, whose fortune was rumored to be as unstable as her temper; the young pianist Clara Hensley, invited for entertainment, but watching the household drama more than the piano keys; and Captain Leonard Vale, a decorated officer recently returned from service and far too haunted for a holiday celebration. Lady Winterton drifted from guest to guest, smiling with a poise that might have seemed effortless, had one not noticed the tremor in her hand each time she adjusted a taper or straightened a ribbon. For tonight's chosen candle, an ornate, pearl-white creation crafted in 1848, was rumored to hold more sentimental value than any she had lit before. "It belonged to my late husband," she confided quietly to Mrs. Longcross. "He adored this candle, lit it every Christmas Eve without fail. I have not used it since his passing." "And yet you light it now?" Mrs. Longcross asked, raising a penciled brow. Lady Winterton hesitated. "Some traditions, my dear Beatrice, must be revived before they are lost forever." But even as she said it, doubt flickered in her eyes. As the final preparations were underway, a sharp, unexpected clatter sounded from the east corridor, followed by the muted cry of a servant. The guests startled, several turning instinctively toward the source. Lady Winterton's composure faltered. Captain Vale moved to the door at once. "What was that?" Clara whispered. No one answered. Before anyone could venture forth, a breath of cold wind pushed through the room as the main doors were opened by the butler. The figure who stepped across the threshold was instantly recognizable, even to those who had never met him in person. He wore an immaculate dark overcoat, a perfectly symmetrical moustache, and an expression of polite curiosity tinged with unmistakable precision. "Hercule Poirot!" Lady Winterton exclaimed, startled but relieved. "You received my letter." Poirot inclined his head with a courteous smile. "Madame, when one requests the assistance of Hercule Poirot, one must expect, naturellement, that he arrives with punctuality and purpose. But I had hoped you would come tomorrow morning," she faltered. "Then I beg your pardon," he said gently. "But your note suggested an urgency not suitable for delay. I fear, madame, that something troubles this house. Already, as I stepped from my car, I felt it an unease, a dissonance. It is in the air." Lady Winterton's hands clasped together. The guests exchanged looks. Poirot glanced about the room with quiet interest. "And yet I intrude upon a fete. Forgive me. It is merely that when one is invited with cryptic warnings, one arrives expecting, how do you say, developments." Before Lady Winterton could respond, the butler reappeared at her side, his complexion pale. "My lady," he whispered urgently, "it is the east corridor. You must come at once." A hush fell across the room. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "If I may, madame." She nodded, visibly shaken. "And so, At 6:30 on a snowy December evening, the great Hercule Poirot stepped deeper into Winterton Hall, unaware that within the next hour, a crime would take place so inexplicable, so steeped in secrecy and symbolism, that even the great detective would find his little grey cells tested as never before. The candle ceremony had not yet begun, but already the first shadow had fallen. Lady Winterton led the way through the drawing-room doors, her steps quick despite the stiffness in her posture. Poirot followed at her side, his gaze moving with deliberate precision over every detail of the corridor they entered. Those guests who had gathered near the doorway exchanged murmurs before drifting after them at a cautious distance. Unwilling to be left behind, yet fearful of what had occurred, the east corridor was dimmer than the rest of the house, lit only by a sequence of tall brass sconces bearing narrow white candles. Their flames quivered uneasily as though disturbed by more than a passing draught. The scent of beeswax mingled with something sharper, an acrid edge that Poirot noted at once. A maid stood near the far archway, wringing her hands. Her eyes were red with fright. At her feet lay the stand used earlier for displaying the Winterton family's collection of ceremonial candles, now toppled on its side. Shards of porcelain from a decorative dish glittered across the carpet. "My lady," the maid whispered, "I swear I did not touch it. I was polishing the railing when I heard a sound like glass breaking. When I turned, it had already fallen." Poirot approached the scene with measured steps. "You were alone in this corridor, mademoiselle?" "Yes, sir. No one passed me. At least, I did not see anyone." Poirot crouched and examined the scattered fragments without placing a single finger upon them. His eyes moved carefully from the broken porcelain to the overturned stand, then to the candles at either end of the corridor. "The fall was sudden," he murmured, "but not clumsy. Note, Madame Winterton, the angle of the stand. If it were knocked by accident, it would have fallen backward toward the wall, not forward into the corridor." Lady Winterton's breath trembled. "Then someone must have pushed it deliberately." "Ah, perhaps," Poirot replied softly, "though we do not yet leap to conclusions. Hercule Poirot observes, he does not assume, but someone was indeed here to disturb the display. That, I think, is evident." She pressed a hand to her throat. "That dish belonged to my husband's mother. It has sat beside the ceremonial candles for years. Yet tonight," Poirot said, "it is broken. An omen, some would say. But Poirot does not believe in omens, only in actions and motives." Captain Vale, who had followed more closely than the others, stepped forward. "Forgive me, Lady Winterton, but is anything missing from the display?" She stiffened. "Missing?" "Yes," Poirot echoed. "A most pertinent question. Was the ceremonial candle for tonight, this one of great sentimental value, placed here earlier?" Lady Winterton nodded slowly. "Yes. My husband kept it locked in his study cabinet, but earlier this afternoon I had it brought out and prepared. It should be on the stand." Poirot gestured toward the empty space near the toppled base. "And yet, madame, it is not." A whisper of shock rippled through the small group that had gathered. Mrs. Longcross's sharp eyes widened, and Roland Ashbury muttered an oath under his breath. Clara Hensley clasped her gloved hands tightly together, as though she feared the candle might have vanished by her doing. Lady Winterton swayed, and Poirot steadied her with a gentle hand. "The candle, it has been stolen?" "It would seem so," Poirot said, "unless it has merely been moved. But why? For mischief? For symbolism? Or perhaps," he paused briefly, "for a more troubling purpose entirely?" The guests exchanged uneasy glances. The missing candle had already cast a shadow over the evening, and none could ignore the tension building in the corridor. Poirot turned to the maid. "You heard the sound not more than a minute before we arrived?" "Yes, sir. And before that moment?" "No one was near the display." "No one?" Poirot straightened. Then the felon was quick, bold, and familiar with the house. He or she made no attempt to conceal the disturbance. Ashbury cleared his throat. "Do you suggest, sir, that one of us is responsible?" Poirot gave a slight shrug. "One of you? All of you? Or none of you?" "At this moment, monsieur, I merely gather the facts. Judgment comes only when the pattern reveals itself." Captain Vale's voice was low. But why steal a candle that has no real monetary value? Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Ah, but its value lies not in the francs or the pounds, but in the sentiment, the meaning, the timing. To light a candle of memory is to invite emotion. To remove that candle is to disrupt it. When a symbolic act is interrupted, one must ask, who fears the light it might bring? Lady Winterton paled at his words. Poirot, do you believe the theft is connected to the warning I wrote you about? Madame, Poirot replied, when a disturbance occurs on the very evening you express fear of a threat, I cannot dismiss the connection. Someone wished to unsettle this household. Perhaps only that, or perhaps much more. He began pacing the corridor slowly, examining the sconces, the small scratches near the wall, the faint indentations on the carpet fibers. Every detail fed his ever-growing portrait of the unseen hand that had moved through the hall moments earlier. Clara stepped forward timidly. Should we cancel the gathering? Perhaps the candle-lighting ceremony should wait. Lady Winterton hesitated, her voice small. No, my husband cherished this tradition. I will not allow fear to silence it. Poirot studied her for a moment, then nodded. Courage, madame. Yet take care. Tonight, a game has begun in this house, a psychological game, and one must proceed with delicacy. The thief watches now, I am certain. The next move is theirs. He motioned gently toward the corridor entrance. Let us return to the drawing room. There, I will speak with each guest individually. The one who steals an object of sentiment reveals much, I think, about the heart. As they walked back toward the warm glow of the gathering, the candles behind them flickered once more, as though whispering secrets to the empty corridor. The shadow of the missing candle stretched invisibly through Winterton Hall, and Poirot, with his little grey cells alert and calculating, knew that the night was only just beginning. The drawing room had regained some of its earlier warmth by the time Poirot and the others returned, yet the festive atmosphere had thinned, replaced by a palpable wariness. Conversations that once flowed freely now drifted in hushed tones, each guest glancing at the others with a newfound caution. Lady Winterton asked the butler to bring additional firewood, though Poirot suspected she merely wished for something familiar and domestic to counter the unease. Poirot stood near the hearth, his eyes narrowed thoughtfully as he surveyed the guests. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering firelight, revealed far more than they intended, small tells, shadows of guilt or curiosity. Poirot believed in patterns, and these subtle fragments were already assembling into the earliest outline of one. Lady Winterton took a steadying breath and addressed the room. My friends, please remain calm. The disturbance was minor, though unfortunate. Monsieur Poirot will conduct a few brief inquiries, nothing more. Mrs. Longcross let out a sharp laugh, thin, brittle. Nothing more? My dear Eleanor, someone has crept through your corridors and stolen the very candle you intended to honor your husband with. That is hardly a trifle. Captain Vale shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. Poirot, however, watched her with interest. Madame Longcross speaks with passion, he said gently. It is often in passion that truth is revealed, yet we must not assume too quickly. A small theft, a toppled stand, these may be precursors, or merely mischief. Time will tell. Roland Ashbury cleared his throat. If you wish to question us individually, Poirot, perhaps it would be best to begin at once. Some of us have journeys home tonight. Journeys, Monsieur Ashbury, Poirot repeated softly. Planned before the theft, or prompted by it? Ashbury stiffened. I beg your pardon? Poirot smiled politely. Nothing. Only a curiosity. You see, when something unexpected occurs, one notes who wishes suddenly to leave the scene. Ashbury's jaw tightened, and he looked away. Poirot stored the reaction carefully. It will be most efficient, Poirot continued, if I speak first with whomever was nearest to the east corridor before the incident. Captain Vale, I believe you were by the window there roughly 10 minutes before. Vale hesitated before nodding. I stepped into the corridor briefly. Yes, only to fetch a telegram from the hall table. I heard nothing suspicious. Poirot gestured toward a quiet corner of the room. Come, if you will. Vale followed, posture upright, his expression disciplined yet strained. Lady Winterton watched anxiously as the two men withdrew, and Mrs. Longcross leaned toward Clara with a conspiratorial whisper. "The captain is too calm," she murmured. "Mark my words. Soldiers often carry secrets." Clara flinched. "You shouldn't make accusations, my dear girl," Mrs. Longcross replied. "Everyone in this room is a suspect, including you." Clara looked down quickly, her hands twisting in her lap. Poirot observed the exchange from across the room even as he began speaking with Vale. He had a remarkable talent for conducting two forms of observation at once, one direct, one peripheral. "Captain," he began quietly, "you mentioned that you stepped into the corridor earlier. At that time, did you notice whether the ceremonial candle was already out of place?" "No," Vale answered without hesitation. "It was still there. I remember because its holder caught the light." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "a detail most useful. And when you returned to the drawing room, did you see anyone follow you or enter the corridor?" Vale frowned, thinking carefully. "No one. The hall was empty." Poirot nodded. "Tell me, Captain Vale, this telegram you fetched, was its message distressing?" Vale blinked. "How did you observe?" Poirot said quietly. "Your hand trembles, but not from cold or fear. It is the tremor of a man who carries a burden." Vale hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "It was from my brother. He is unwell. I may need to return home soon." "A sorrowful matter," Poirot said gently, "but not one that concerns our little mystery. You may rejoin the group." Vale looked relieved as he stepped away. Poirot allowed himself a moment to arrange new pieces of the puzzle. Vale's distress seemed genuine and unrelated to a stolen candle. Yet Poirot knew better than to discard any possibility entirely. He turned next to Clara Hensley, who seemed to shrink into her chair when Poirot approached. "Mademoiselle, a few words if you please." She stood, smoothing her dress nervously, and followed him to the side. Her eyes darted toward the corridor, as though afraid it might reveal something about her. "Clara," Poirot began in a tone that invited calm, "were you by chance near the east corridor at any point between 6 o'clock and the incident?" "No," she whispered. "I stayed in the drawing room. I've hardly left it. Yet you appear troubled." I felt something was wrong even before the stand fell. There was a tension like a storm before it breaks." Poirot tilted his head. "You have intuition, mademoiselle." "Not intuition, just observation. People were acting strangely tonight." He leaned closer. "Who, specifically?" She swallowed. "Mrs. Longcross and Mr. Ashbury. They were whispering earlier, near the fireplace. When I approached, they stopped abruptly." Poirot absorbed this without comment. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." Clara returned to her seat, glancing nervously toward Mrs. Longcross, who met her gaze with a disdainful sniff. Poirot now crossed the room to Ashbury, whose attempt at nonchalance had grown increasingly strained. "Monsieur Ashbury, you and I must speak next." Ashbury forced a smile. "Of course." As they stepped aside, Poirot saw the politician's facade falter, just for a heartbeat. It was enough. "Your conversation with Madame Longcross earlier," Poirot began. "Was it related to the ceremony, or to some matter more sensitive?" Ashbury's eyes hardened. "I do not appreciate implications." "But I make none," Poirot said mildly. "I merely ask." Ashbury hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "We discussed a private debt. Nothing more." "A debt," Poirot repeated, his eyes gleaming just slightly. Money matters so often complicate the human heart. Before Ashbury could reply, Lady Winterton gasped softly behind them. Poirot turned. The butler stood in the doorway, his voice trembling. "My lady, there has been another disturbance." In the study, a cold hush fell. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The game, it seemed, was already escalating. A stillness settled over the room as the butler's words faded. Lady Winterton clutched the back of a chair for support, her knuckles whitening. Poirot stepped toward the butler with deliberate calm, the soft click of his shoes echoing faintly against the polished floor. "The study," Poirot said, his voice low but commanding. "Lead us there at once, if you please." The butler inclined his head and moved quickly through the hall. The guests followed at varying paces. Mrs. Longcross drifting forward with predatory curiosity, Ashbury tense and alert, Clara nervously twisting her gloves, and Captain Vale remaining close to Lady Winterton, who appeared in danger of losing composure entirely. Winterton Hall's study was a stately chamber lined with shelves of old books, framed portraits, and oak cabinets with brass hinges. A single lamp glowed on the desk, casting shadows across the room. But even before Poirot stepped inside, he sensed the change in the atmosphere. The air held that peculiar mixture of haste and disturbance he had come to associate with moments just after a clandestine act. The butler gestured toward the cabinet at the far end. "My lady keeps her late husband's personal documents in there. Just moments ago, I found the door ajar." Poirot approached the cabinet, noticing at once the faint irregularity of the carpet pile leading toward it, a subtle path, recently pressed. He crouched, studying the pattern without touching it. "It has been opened very recently. Someone stood here quite some time. Shifting weight. Uncertain, perhaps." Lady Winterton's voice quivered. "But why would anyone come here? What could they want from my husband's papers?" "A question of great importance," Poirot murmured. He opened the cabinet gently, revealing a neatly arranged interior. Folders, labeled in her husband's distinctive handwriting, a small wooden box, several envelopes sealed with wax, and an old brass key resting on a velvet square. Yet something was undeniably wrong. "Observe, madame," pointing to a narrow slot where dust had settled unevenly. "A space here empty. What was kept in this place?" Lady Winterton's breath caught. "A leather-bound journal. My husband wrote in it every December. Reflections, memories, personal thoughts. I had not looked at it since his passing. And tonight," Poirot said, "the journal is gone." A faint gasp swept through the group. Clara moved closer, almost involuntarily. "Do you think whoever stole the candle took the journal as well?" Poirot turned, his gaze precise. "Two thefts of sentimental objects. Within the same hour, both linked to the late Lord Winterton. Mademoiselle, it would be most unwise to dismiss the connection." Mrs. Longcross folded her arms. "If the journal contained anything of value, financial, political, or otherwise, one can easily imagine motives beyond sentiment." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You speak confidently, madame. Perhaps too confidently," she sniffed. "I merely state what anyone might deduce." Poirot said nothing, but he filed the comment away. He returned his attention to the cabinet, examining the edges, the hinges, the pattern of disturbance. Then he stepped back. "Not forced," he said. "Opened with care." "So who among you knows where the spare keys are kept?" Lady Winterton shook her head slowly. "There are no spare keys. That cabinet has had only one key for years, and I keep it in my room." "Yet it has been opened," Poirot replied quietly. "So either the key was taken from your room earlier, or someone possessed knowledge of the mechanism sufficient to open it without one." Ashbury cleared his throat. "The butler? A servant? Someone familiar with household locks?" Poirot gave him a mild, almost amused look. "Monsieur, you leap too quickly. It is not always the servants." He turned to the butler. "You found the door ajar. Did you see anyone near the room?" "No, sir. I had gone to fetch additional coals for the fire. When I returned, the door was open." "And the room?" Poirot glanced around. "Anything else disturbed?" The butler hesitated. "Only the window latch. It was unfastened." Poirot stepped to the window, inspecting the metal latch with a practiced eye. He pressed it lightly. It shifted with ease. This latch shows signs of recent handling, yet look no footprints outside in the snow leading to the sill. Therefore, the window was not the means of entry, but an attempt to mislead. Captain Vale nodded slowly. "A staged distraction. Someone is trying to confuse the timeline." Just so, Poirot said with quiet satisfaction. Someone wishes us to think the intruder came from outside the house. But the truth is always inside. Lady Winterton's voice trembled. Poirot, what does this mean? Are you suggesting members of my own household, my guests, are involved? Madame, he replied gently, there are only so many people within these walls tonight. To assume innocence or guilt before the facts would be folly. But what I do know is this: the thief moves with purpose. The candle, the journal, they are pieces of a design that speaks of the past returning to cast shadows upon the present. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and Lady Winterton shuddered. Poirot turned to the group. I will now ask a question. Think carefully before you answer. Did any of you know of the journal's existence? Silence held for several seconds. Then, Mrs. Longcross raised a brow. I knew Lord Winterton kept personal notes. He spoke of it once at dinner, years ago. But I had no interest in his musings. Ashbury shook his head. Clara murmured that she had never heard of such a journal. Captain Vale said nothing until Poirot fixed him with a steady gaze. No, Vale said firmly. Poirot did not move, but something in his eyes sharpened. Très bien. And yet someone knew. Someone who sought not merely a symbol, but knowledge. The room seemed to darken, the lamplight flickering against the heavy drapes. Outside, snow tapped softly at the glass, as though marking the minutes. Poirot closed the cabinet gently. The thief has made the second move. Now, mes amis, the game becomes more dangerous. As the guests exchanged uneasy looks, a distant sound echoed through the hall, the unmistakable clang of the great clock striking 7. Lady Winterton gasped. The hour of the candle ceremony. Poirot's voice was calm, but carried a deep gravity. And the hour, perhaps, when the truth begins to reveal its first cracks. The clock fell silent. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked quiet, deliberate, and Poirot knew the night was preparing its next revelation. The great clock's final chime seemed to linger in the air long after its echo should have faded, as though Winterton Hall itself held its breath. Lady Winterton pressed a trembling hand to her lips, staring toward the corridor that led back to the drawing-room. Poirot watched her quietly for a moment before offering his arm. Madame, if the candle ceremony must continue, then it shall do so under the supervision of Hercule Poirot. Fear is a poor companion. Order, however, is a friend most loyal. She gave a faint nod, though her eyes betrayed doubt. The others followed more reluctantly, Mrs. Longcross with impatient strides, Ashbury carrying an air of irritated suspicion, Clara clutching her hands tightly, and Captain Vale maintaining a soldier's vigilance. As they entered the drawing-room once more, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows upon the polished floor. The familiar warmth did little to comfort them. The atmosphere had changed subtly, a tension woven through the air like an invisible thread. Lady Winterton moved toward the mantel, where an array of candles awaited lighting. Her fingers hovered over them, uncertain. Without my husband's candle, she whispered, the ceremony feels hollow. Poirot stepped beside her. Madame, traditions endure because their spirit does not depend on one object alone. If you wish, another candle may be lit tonight. Her eyes glistened. Yes, yes, perhaps that is best. She selected a slender crimson taper, striking a match with hands steadier than before. Yet, as the flame caught the wick, Clara startled with a soft cry. The match sputtered violently, sending a sharp spark toward the table. Lady Winterton gasped and dropped it. Poirot moved instantly, snuffing the fallen match beneath his shoe before it could catch the drapery. Careful, madame. Even small flames can cause chaos if handled without care. Clara's voice trembled. I do not know why it frightened me. It simply burst. Many things burst when tension is great, Poirot replied gently, though a flicker of curiosity passed through his eyes. Tell me, did the flame seem unusually bright to you? Yes. Almost like it leapt. Ashbury scoffed lightly. Nerves. All of us are on edge. Poirot turned to him. And some, perhaps more than others. Ashbury stiffened, though he did not respond. Poirot resumed his study of the candle, now flickering peacefully on the mantel. "A symbol remains a symbol," he murmured. "Even if the chosen object is changed. Let us proceed." Lady Winterton stood before her guests, lifting her chin with renewed dignity. "Thank you all for your patience. I know the evening has taken an unexpected turn, but I intend to honor my husband's tradition, and I am grateful you remain with me." Mrs. Longcross flashed a thin smile. "Not all of us had the option to flee, Eleanor. The roads are nearly impassable with snow," Poirot interjected softly. "And perhaps it is just as well. When a mystery unfolds, it often prefers its audience close at hand." A faint rustle swept through the group. Unease, curiosity, the prickling awareness of scrutiny. Poirot stepped into the center of the room, his hands clasped neatly before him. "I will ask now that each of you remain here while I make a small examination of the adjacent hallways. Only a few moments. Captain Vale, if you would accompany me." Vale nodded at once. Poirot's selection had been deliberate. The captain's disciplined temperament would be useful, though Poirot intended also to observe him more closely. As they stepped into the shadowed corridor, Poirot lowered his voice. "Tell me, Captain, you spoke earlier of your brother's illness. You returned from your service recently, did you not?" Vale hesitated before answering. "Yes, a few months ago." "War changes a man, does it not?" Vale's jaw tightened. "It changes many things, and yet you carry yourself with admirable composure tonight," Poirot said lightly. "Except, perhaps, for the moment when Lady Winterton lit the candle." Vale looked startled. "I was simply startled by Clara's reaction," Poirot hummed faintly. "Perhaps, or perhaps fire evokes memories you would rather forget." Vale stopped walking. "Poirot, if you're implying I had anything to do with the thefts—" "I imply nothing," Poirot replied calmly. "I observe only that you watch Lady Winterton with the eye of a man guarding something or someone." Vale's expression hardened. "Lady Winterton is a friend. I am simply concerned for her safety." Poirot nodded gently. "As are we all." They moved farther down the corridor. Poirot paused, examining the carpet near an alcove. A faint indentation caught his eye. A heel mark. Narrow, elegant. "A woman's shoe," he murmured. Vale leaned closer. "Mrs. Longcross? Perhaps," Poirot mused. "Or Clara, or Lady Winterton herself earlier in the evening. But we do not guess, we compare. The mark is fresh, made after the earlier disturbance." He straightened, eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. "And yet no woman has left the drawing room since we returned." Vale frowned. "Meaning the mark was made before but unnoticed?" Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami. Observe the overlap. This indentation lies atop the earlier scuffing from when the stand fell. It was made after the disturbance." Vale's eyes widened slightly. "So someone left the room when we did not see?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Precisely." They returned to the drawing room, where the guests watched their entrance with varying degrees of tension. Poirot's gaze swept across them, pausing momentarily on each. "One among you," he said quietly, "has moved in ways they should not have." Mrs. Longcross huffed. "What melodrama?" "We have all been here." Poirot offered a small, precise smile. "Madame, Hercule Poirot does not rely on melodrama, only on facts." Lady Winterton stepped forward anxiously. "Poirot, what does this mean?" "Who?" Before he could answer, the house was plunged into sudden darkness. A collective cry rose from the guests. The fire flickered wildly, then smothered, leaving the room in trembling shadows. Poirot remained perfectly still. "Mes amis," he said into the dark, "do not move. This moment, this was planned." A sound echoed in the hall, a soft, deliberate footstep. And then another. The stolen candle was gone. The journal was gone. And now, it seemed, someone had decided to strike again under the cover of darkness. Poirot's voice, calm but razor-sharp, cut through the silence. "Be very still. The next move is critical, for the culprit has revealed their boldest intention yet. For a moment, the darkness felt absolute, as if someone had draped a heavy velvet curtain over the entire room. Clara gasped softly. "Missus!" Longcross muttered a curse under her breath, and Ashbury's shuffling indicated he was inching backward toward the wall. Lady Winterton called out faintly for the butler, her voice thin with fear, while Captain Vale instinctively positioned himself near her, his boots planting firmly on the carpet. Poirot remained motionless, listening with every sharpened sense. Darkness was, to him, not merely an obstacle but a revelation. When sight is removed, sound becomes king, and sound, unlike faces, does not lie. A faint click echoed from somewhere beyond the drawing-room threshold, metal brushing against metal. A latch, or perhaps a lock. Someone was moving with intent. "Stay perfectly still," Poirot repeated softly. "The one who acts in darkness does so because they rely on your confusion." Mrs. Longcross snapped. "Poirot, this is hardly the time for philosophy." "Hush," he murmured sharply, "for we are not alone in this darkness." At that precise moment, a second sound crackled, a brief scraping of paper or leather brushing wood. Then footsteps again, quicker now, retreating. Poirot's ears pricked. The direction was unmistakable. "Captain Vale," he whispered. "To your left toward the corridor." Vale moved at once, steps purposeful. A startled breath sounded ahead of him, someone caught off guard. Then came a thud, the soft impact of a body glancing against a wall, followed by rapid footsteps fleeing down the hall. Vale lunged forward in pursuit, but Poirot called out, "No, Captain! Stop where you are!" Vale halted. The footsteps continued for several seconds, then abruptly ceased, as if absorbed into the very walls. Silence washed over the house. Then, without warning, the lights flickered once, twice, and flared back to life. Gasps filled the room as faces re-emerged from the dark, pale and strained. Lady Winterton clutched her chest. Clara blinked rapidly, her breath catching. "Mrs." Longcross surveyed the room as though expecting to see an assailant materialize before her. The butler rushed in at last, breathless. "My lady, forgive me," the generator faltered. The secondary line cut without warning. Poirot gave a small, tight nod. "Convenient timing, n'est-ce pas?" Lady Winterton steadied herself on the mantel. "Poirot, what just happened? What did they do?" Poirot walked slowly toward the corridor, hands clasped behind his back. During the darkness, someone moved quickly and without hesitation. They knew exactly where they wished to go. Someone prepared for this moment. "But what did they take?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. Poirot paused. "Not take, mademoiselle. Retrieve." The group exchanged uneasy glances as he proceeded down the corridor, every step measured. He stopped at the alcove with the fresh indentation they had examined earlier. This time, something else caught his eye. A scrap of torn ribbon lay near the baseboard, a narrow strip. Deep, navy blue. Poirot bent to examine it. "A woman's ribbon," he murmured. "From a dress, or perhaps a cloak." Mrs. Longcross inhaled sharply. "Are you suggesting—" Poirot turned, eyes calm but incisive. "I suggest nothing yet. I merely observe." "Torn fabric proves nothing," Ashbury interjected, struggling to keep his composure. "Anyone could have dropped that long before tonight." "Oh," Poirot replied mildly. "Yet moments ago, we heard someone struggle briefly with Captain Vale in the darkness. And torn fabric, monsieur, is often a byproduct of hasty retreat." Vale stepped forward. "I didn't see who it was. I only heard someone trying to slip past." Poirot nodded. "Just so. And note the distance you covered, 3 paces, perhaps 4 before the mysterious intruder fled. That means they were very near us in the drawing room when the lights went out." Mrs. Longcross crossed her arms. Whoever it was, they must have been waiting for the perfect moment. Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Correct, madame. And perfection is rarely spontaneous." He moved past them, re-entering the drawing room. Lady Winterton's breathing steadied, though she watched him with palpable dread. Poirot approached the writing desk near the window, inspecting the objects upon it. Then, After a moment, he touched a leather blotter and lifted it gently. Underneath lay a single envelope sealed, but not with fresh wax. Its edges were worn from handling. Lady Winterton gasped. That envelope. It belonged to my husband. It has been in the cabinet for years. Poirot turned to her, holding the envelope delicately. Madame, someone has placed this here during the darkness. The question is why? Clara stepped closer, peering anxiously. Are you going to open it? Poirot shook his head. Not yet, but its placement tells us something significant. Ashbury scoffed weakly. And what, pray, does it tell us? Poirot's voice was gentle, almost reflective. That our thief is not merely a thief. They are someone who wishes to control the narrative. Someone who plants what they wish us to find, hides what they wish us not to find, and manipulates timing with extraordinary precision. He held the envelope up to the light, studying its thickness. This letter carries weight, literal and figurative. It may contain motive, message, or warning. Perhaps even all three. Mrs. Longcross swallowed. Then why not open it? Because, Poirot said, it was placed for all of us to see, and anything placed so deliberately must be interpreted with equal deliberation. He turned slowly, his gaze resting on each guest in turn. Mes amis, the darkness was not intended to conceal an escape. It was intended to orchestrate a move, a calculated action within a much larger design. Lady Winterton's hand trembled. Poirot, I fear something terrible is unfolding. Poirot approached her, bowing his head slightly. Madame, darkness reveals as much as it hides. Tonight, someone showed their hand. He placed the envelope gently upon the desk. And now, I intend to discover precisely whose hand it was. A faint crackle sounded from the hearth. Embers shifting. Poirot's eyes sharpened, his voice steady as ice. The next phase of this enigma has begun. The envelope upon the desk seemed to draw every gaze toward it, as though it radiated its own quiet gravity. Lady Winterton stared at it with visible dread, her fingers trembling slightly at her sides. Poirot allowed the tension to settle, knowing that in silence, truths often stirred beneath the surface. The guests stood in a loose semicircle, unequal, uneasy, and united only by their unwilling presence in the spiraling mystery of Winterton Hall. Poirot lifted the envelope once more, careful not to disturb the brittle seal. Before we open this relic of the past, we must consider why it was brought forward now. A thief who acts with precision also selects symbolism with great care. Mrs. Longcross leaned in. You believe this was meant as a message? But of course, Poirot said, though the meaning remains hidden until we understand who benefits from its appearance. Ashbury exhaled sharply. And we are to simply stand here while you philosophize over postal mysteries? Why not open it and be done with it? Poirot gave him a small, cool smile. Monsieur, impatience is often the enemy of clarity. But perhaps you are eager because you fear what the letter might reveal. Ashbury's jaw tightened. He said nothing more. Lady Winterton turned to Poirot, her voice wavering. Perhaps we should take a moment to breathe. This evening is overwhelming us all. Poirot regarded her with softened eyes. You have endured much, madame. Yet I sense that the fear troubling you tonight began before the candle was ever stolen. She flinched slightly, her composure cracking. Captain Vale stepped subtly closer, protective, without appearing overt. Poirot noticed the motion but did not comment. The fireplace crackled again, a sudden pop that made Clara gasp. Poirot turned his head sharply toward the hearth. The fire burns hotter now, does it not? As if someone stirred it recently. The butler stiffened. Sir, I have not touched the grate since before the ceremony. Just so, Poirot murmured. He strode toward the hearth and crouched before the flames. His eyes narrowed as he studied the embers. Something was placed here. Something small. See how the ash clusters differently at the base? Lady Winterton stepped backward, a hand pressed to her throat. Poirot, are you saying something was burned? Poirot touched the grate lightly with his fingertip, careful not to disturb the evidence. When he withdrew his hand, a faint smear of soot marked it. Embedded in the grey dust was a sliver, thin, curved, almost metallic in sheen. He held it up for all to see. "A fragment of wax," he announced softly. "From a candle, white wax." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Clara whispered, "The stolen candle. They destroyed it?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Not destroyed. Only a piece of it." The symbolism grows clearer. Someone wishes to eliminate trace elements while leaving behind hints. Mrs. Longcross scoffed. "Hints? Or misdirection?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Even misdirection, madame, is a direction. You cannot deceive without revealing something of your intent." He placed the wax fragment onto the mantel carefully. "Our thief acts boldly. First the candle, then the journal, now an offering to the fire. And each move points not to chaos, but to orchestration." Ashbury's voice broke the silence abruptly. "This is madness. We are standing in a parlor while someone skulks through the house committing whatever this is. Why not call the police?" Poirot turned to him. "Because, Monsieur Ashbury, the police are trained to chase criminals. Tonight's adversary, however, plays a psychological game. A game of intimidation, secrecy, and manipulation. It is not the constable's blunt approach that will solve it, but the little grey cells." Ashbury reddened, but said no more. Poirot resumed his pacing, his eyes drifting once more toward the envelope. "This letter is not meant merely to be discovered. It is meant to guide us, but we must know its context before we read its contents." Clara cleared her throat hesitantly. "Lady Winterton, did your husband ever speak of leaving letters behind? For you, or for anyone?" Lady Winterton hesitated, anguish flickering across her features. "He wrote many private notes, some for himself, some intended for me, some he never said. The journal often contained references to unfinished matters, though he was always vague. I do not know what this envelope contains." Poirot stepped closer to her. "But you fear it." Her eyes glistened. "Then you know," Poirot said gently, "that whatever truth lies within it was meant to resurface tonight." Captain Vale interjected softly. "Poirot, perhaps we should read it now. The longer we wait, the more time we grant the culprit to act." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, Captain, you are correct. The time for delay has passed." He held the envelope in both hands. The guests drew closer, not physically, but in tension, in focus, in shared anticipation. Poirot slid a thin letter opener beneath the seal. But before he could lift the flap, a sudden pounding shook the front doors, 3 heavy knocks that reverberated through the hall. Everyone froze. The butler paled. "But no one should be arriving at this hour. The roads—" Poirot lifted a hand. "Stay where you are." He stepped to the door of the drawing room, listening intently. The knocking came again, more urgent, more forceful. Lady Winterton whispered, "Who could possibly—" Poirot straightened, eyes narrowing with sudden clarity. "Mes amis," he said quietly, "our mystery has taken another turn. Whoever stands at that door arrives not by chance." The pounding ceased. A silence followed, thick, foreboding. Then a voice called from the entryway, muffled but unmistakably strained. "Open the door! Please, someone open!" Clara gasped. That voice. It can't be. Poirot moved swiftly, signaling the butler. "Let us greet our unexpected visitor, for I believe their arrival will change everything." The door creaked open, and what stood beyond it made every person in the drawing room recoil in shock. The doorway yawned open, letting in a blast of frigid air that swept through the entry hall like the breath of the night itself. Snowflakes drifted inward, carried on the wind, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to surge into Winterton Hall. The figure standing on the threshold was hunched against the cold, his coat crusted with snow, his hair damp and plastered to his brow. His eyes wide, reddened, and frantic, darted past the butler and fixed directly on Poirot. "Please," he gasped, stepping forward unsteadily. "You must let me in." Lady Winterton recoiled. Good heavens. Edward? Good. A stunned hush fell across the room. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Mrs. Longcross stiffened visibly. Captain Vale's jaw clenched, and Ashbury muttered a curse of disbelief. Poirot stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Monsieur. Edward Winterton, I presume. The man nodded shakily, though his gaze remained unfocused. He looked as though he had come from a battlefield rather than a country lane. I didn't know where else to go, he stammered. I've been walking for hours. The roads are impassable. My car, it's stuck somewhere in a drift. I almost turned back, but I saw the lights. Lady Winterton, pale and trembling, whispered, Edward, but you were not expected. No one has seen you in months. I know, he said hoarsely, but I received a letter. It said I must come tonight, that everything depended on it. Poirot's eyebrows lifted with quiet curiosity. A letter, you say? May we see this letter, monsieur? Edward fumbled inside his coat, eventually withdrawing a damp, crumpled envelope. He extended it with shaking fingers. Poirot took it carefully, smoothing the wet paper between his hands. The handwriting, though partially smeared, was still legible enough to reveal its familiarity to Lady Winterton. It's my husband's hand, she whispered, staring at the ink with horror. Edward, where did you receive this? It was delivered to my lodgings in London. Edward's voice quavered. No return address, no explanation, only instructions. It said I had to be here tonight before 7, Clara whispered. Before 7. Poirot glanced at the tall clock in the hallway, which now read nearly 7:30. And yet, you arrived after 7, monsieur. Why the delay? Why? My car, Edward repeated, swallowing hard. And the storm. And I think someone followed me. A ripple of alarm passed through the guests. Poirot regarded him steadily. Someone followed you? Are you certain? No, Edward admitted, rubbing his forehead. I'm not certain of anything anymore. I've been ill, exhausted. I thought I saw a figure behind me on the road, but it could have been nothing. Mrs. Longcross scoffed softly. Or it could have been something very real indeed. Poirot controlled the room with a raised hand. Monsieur Edward, before we proceed further, allow me to ask, why did you disappear from society after your brother's death? Many believed you had left England entirely. Edward lowered his head. I should have left. I wanted to, but I couldn't escape the guilt. Lady Winterton flinched. Guilt? What? Guilt. Edward's voice trembled as he answered. My brother and I quarreled, bitterly. The night before he died, I said things I should never have said. When he passed, I felt responsible. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Poirot studied him closely, absorbing every detail. The trembling hands, the haunted eyes, the sagging posture of a man half convinced of his own ruin. Yet, beneath the disarray, Poirot sensed something else. A tension not born entirely of remorse. Monsieur, Poirot said gently, your sorrow is a heavy burden, but your arrival tonight is timely. There have been occurrences. Edward blinked. Occurrences? A theft. 2, in fact. And threats implied through action. We also discovered a journal missing your brother's final December writings. Edward staggered slightly. His journal? Gone? But why? Poirot held his gaze. Perhaps you can help us understand. You knew your brother well. Edward shook his head vehemently. Not as well as I should have. His December writings were private. He never shared them with anyone, not even with her. He nodded shakily toward Lady Winterton. She drew back, wounded by the suggestion, but said nothing. Poirot lifted the envelope, still lying on the desk, the one planted during the blackout. Monsieur Edward, did you know of this letter? Edward's brow furrowed. No, I've never seen it before. Poirot nodded slowly. His suspicions deepened not because Edward lied, but because he spoke with too much sincerity. A frightened man may lie easily, but his fear betrays him. Edward's fear tonight was real, yes, but directed inward. If he concealed something, it was not malicious, it was buried. Lady Winterton approached him tentatively. "Edward, why did you come here, truly? Did you think the letter was from your brother? From beyond the grave?" Edward let out a broken laugh. "No, I thought it was from you." Lady Winterton froze. "From me? But why would I summon you secretly?" "Because I thought you had forgiven me," he whispered. "Or wanted to." Captain Vale stepped forward, face shadowed. "Or perhaps," he said softly, "someone wanted you here for an entirely different reason." Poirot raised a finger. "Just so. Someone engineered tonight's events with many layers. They wanted the candle missing, the journal missing, the letter displayed, and above all, Monsieur Edward brought here." Mrs. Longcross eyed Edward sharply. "But why? What could he possibly know?" Edward looked helplessly between them. "I know nothing that matters. I only know my mistakes." Poirot shook his head. "No, monsieur. You know something very important. You simply do not realize it yet." He turned toward the rest of the group. "We must remain together now. No one wanders off. No one leaves the house. Our culprit has raised the stakes with Edward's arrival." Clara swallowed nervously. "Poirot, do you believe the person who followed him is here?" Poirot slowly surveyed the room. "Yes," he said quietly. "I believe the one who followed him never left." A sharp knock rattled the windows, a branch striking in the wind. Edward flinched. Poirot offered only a thin, knowing smile. "And now," he murmured. The holiday candle Enigma tightens its circle. The wind howled against the windows like a restless spirit, its icy fingers tapping intermittently at the glass as though demanding entry. Inside Winterton Hall, however, no one spoke. Edward's arrival had folded yet another layer into an already tangled mystery, and Poirot could feel the tension thickening the air like smoke. The guests, now gathered once more in the drawing-room, stared at Edward with a mixture of suspicion, pity, and fear, each emotion mirrored differently in each pair of eyes. Poirot stood at the center, hands clasped neatly. His gaze moved from face to face, pausing upon each for a deliberate moment. It was a silent assessment, an unspoken challenge. "One of you knows far more than you claim." Edward sank heavily into a chair near the fire, holding his coat close around him. The heat of the hearth did little to soften the tremors running through him. Lady Winterton hovered near his side, torn between concern and apprehension. "Poirot," she whispered finally, "what do we do now?" "Edward should rest. He looks half frozen." "Rest? Yes," Poirot replied. "But rest must wait until we resolve one crucial matter." Ashbury sighed impatiently. "Must every revelation come wrapped in riddles tonight? The man is exhausted." Poirot looked at him coolly. "Monsieur, exhaustion does not negate relevance. Edward's arrival was orchestrated. His presence is a thread we must follow before it slips away." Captain Vale stepped forward. "Poirot is right. If someone lured Edward here, it may connect to the thefts, and possibly to the letter planted during the blackout." Mrs. Longcross tapped her foot sharply. "Well then, let us unravel something. Edward, what did your brother write to you in that letter?" Edward looked helpless. "Just that I had to come, that there were matters left unfinished, that I owed it to him to be here tonight." Lady Winterton shivered. "Matters left unfinished. My husband was always cryptic in his journaling, but he never suggested anything urgent or ominous." Poirot studied her carefully. "Madame, grief can blind us to the nuances of the living and the dead. Sometimes a warning is embedded in routine words." He turned back to Edward. "Monsieur, did the letter mention the candle?" "No," Edward whispered. "Only the time. And the phrase, 'You must witness the truth.'" Clara gasped softly. "Witness? Like the ceremony? Or something worse?" Poirot nodded slowly. "The phrase is theatrical, grandiose, but not meaningless. Whoever sent this letter intended Edward to arrive before the ceremony, before the candle was lit." Mrs. Longcross huffed. "Yet he arrived late. Perhaps that foiled the culprit's plans." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Or perhaps the culprit anticipated delays. On nights like these, the weather becomes an accomplice." He walked toward the mantel, raising the wax fragment he had found earlier. Someone burned part of the stolen candle. Why? Not to destroy evidence, it would take more than a scrap to identify. No, it was a signal. A message meant for someone in this room. Captain Vale frowned. A message to whom? Ah, Poirot said softly. That is the question, is it not? But consider this. The candle belonged to Lord Winterton. The journal belonged to Lord Winterton. The letter sent to Edward again, tied to his brother. And Edward's arrival completes the triad. Clara murmured. So the person doing this wants something connected to the brothers? Or, Poirot said, wants to expose something buried between them. Edward's eyes widened with sudden alarm. No, no. I told you I know nothing of importance. Poirot approached him gently. Monsieur Edward, guilt makes poor judgment. It convinces a man he is responsible for storms he had no hand in. But guilt can also blind him to truths he once overlooked. Edward looked away. I can't help you. Poirot nodded slowly. But there was no frustration in his expression, only the patience of a mind 2 steps ahead. Then we must investigate without your recollection. Mes amis, someone left the drawing room during the blackout. Someone who had prepared for the moment. Someone who tore their ribbon in haste. Mrs. Longcross bristled. If you mean me, Poirot, say it plainly. Poirot gave her a serene smile. I accuse no one, but your navy ribbon. Madame, it is the same shade as the fragment found near the alcove. Her hand flew instinctively to her shoulder, and all eyes followed. The ribbon tied there was indeed navy blue, but intact. Fabric can be replaced quickly, Ashbury muttered, or retied. Mrs. Longcross shot him a venomous glare. And who says the ribbon is mine alone? Clara wears navy as well. Clara recoiled. I would never. Hush, Poirot said gently. You reveal more in your fear than in your denial. Clara looked down, fighting tears. Lady Winterton stepped forward. Poirot, please. This is tearing us apart. Poirot turned to her with surprising softness. Madame, mysteries do not tear families apart. Secrets do. His words seemed to chill the room more than the winter wind. Suddenly, a soft clatter echoed from somewhere deeper in the house, something metallic falling onto hardwood. Everyone startled. Poirot lifted a hand. Silence. They waited. Another sound, followed a faint creak, like a door slowly swinging shut. Poirot narrowed his eyes. That came from the study. Captain Vale immediately moved forward. I'll go. No, Poirot said sharply. We go together. He led the way, the group trailing behind him like uneasy shadows. The corridor seemed narrower now, the candle flames along the wall flickering wildly as if warning them back. When they reached the study, Poirot paused at the threshold. The door stood ajar. Inside, the lamplight glowed faintly over the desk, casting long arcs across the carpet. Everything appeared still. Too still. Poirot stepped in and stopped abruptly. On the desk, beside the empty space where the journal once lay, was a new object. A brass key. Lady Winterton gasped. That's Poirot. That is the key to the cabinet. In my husband's study. Poirot approached it, his eyes gleaming with cold precision. Then, he said quietly, our thief has given us the next move. He lifted the key and turned toward the others. But one does not return a key unless they wish a lock to be opened. The key gleamed faintly in Poirot's hand, catching the lamplight as if winking with secret knowledge. The guests hovered behind him in a tense semicircle, their breaths shallow, their faces taut with expectation. Outside, the wind pressed insistently at the shutters. But inside the study the silence was dense, as though the house itself strained to listen. Poirot weighed the key lightly, then turned to Lady Winterton. Madame, you said this cabinet possessed no spare key. She nodded, still pale. Correct. Only one. It has been in my possession since my husband's passing. Yet tonight, Poirot said softly, that single key has been spirited away and returned to us like an invitation. Our thief wishes us to open a door figuratively, perhaps literally. Ashbury stepped nearer, his impatience spilling over. Then, for heaven's sake, open it. End this nonsense. Patience, Poirot murmured, though he moved toward the cabinet with purpose. Mysteries reveal themselves only when one proceeds with order. He inserted the key. It slid in smoothly, too smoothly, Poirot thought, as though recently tested, as though recently used. A soft click sounded as the lock released. Poirot paused, sensing Lady Winterton's apprehension radiating behind him. "Madame, are you prepared?" Her voice trembled. "I do not know, but open it." Slowly, Poirot swung the cabinet door outward. The contents appeared unchanged at first glance. Neatly stacked folders, the wooden box, envelopes arranged in orderly rows. But one thing was new. A folded sheet of parchment rested atop the folders placed deliberately, its edges too crisp to belong to anything previously stored here. Lady Winterton stifled a gasp. Poirot removed the parchment and unfolded it with care, his brows lifted slightly as he examined the contents. "Mes amis, this is not written by Lord Winterton. The handwriting is entirely different." Mrs. Longcross stepped forward. "Then, who? Let us read," Poirot said quietly. The letter was brief, stark in its message. Truth sleeps behind locked doors. But awakened, it burns brighter than any candle. Let the past speak. There was no signature. Clara shivered visibly. "It sounds like a warning." "No," Poirot corrected gently. "A command." Captain Vale frowned. "Someone wants us to dig deeper. But why give us the key? Why lead us?" Poirot folded the parchment again. "Because the one who leads also controls the tempo. Each revelation tonight has been orchestrated. The thief returns only what they wish us to see, when they wish us to see it." Ashbury crossed his arms. "Then, we are being manipulated." "Just so, monsieur." Edward, who had remained silent beside the hearth, now spoke in a near whisper. "Poirot, this, past, the note mentions. What could it mean?" Poirot observed him for a long moment. "That, Monsieur Edward, is precisely what we must determine. What truth did your brother lock away? What did he fear to confront or to reveal?" Edward shook his head helplessly. He never confided in me. Not after our quarrel." Lady Winterton looked at Edward with pained eyes. "Edward, you said you fought with him. But over what?" Edward's throat tightened. "He accused me of recklessness. He said I jeopardized the family name. I told him he was too cautious, too fearful of shadows." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Shadows, monsieur? Did he speak of danger?" Edward hesitated. "Yes, but I thought he meant metaphorical, shadows, doubts, regrets. I never imagined something tangible." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet tonight, every action points to something very tangible indeed." Captain Vale stepped closer. "Poirot, what now? We have a message urging us to uncover some hidden truth. We have stolen items, suspicious movements, and now Edward's sudden arrival." Poirot allowed a faint smile. "Now, Captain, we consider the psychology behind the thief's choices. A candle symbolizing remembrance, a journal of personal reflections, a letter planted to provoke curiosity, and now a key, returned with ceremony." Mrs. Longcross scoffed. "Ceremony? Really, Poirot? But of course," he said, raising a finger. "The thief is theatrical. They wish us to feel the unveiling, not merely witness it. They court drama." His gaze swept the group. "Who among you understands Lord Winterton well enough to employ his symbols with such precision? Who among you has both opportunity and motive to stir the past until it spills into the present?" Silence. Each guest shifted, some subtly, others visibly Clara, wringing her hands. Ashbury looking away. Mrs. Longcross bristling defensively. Vale watching with soldierly intensity. Edward sinking deeper into guilt. Poirot tucked the parchment inside his pocket. "We shall not burn this truth prematurely. Instead, we gather information." He turned to Lady Winterton. "Madame, your late husband's wooden box, what does it contain?" She hesitated. "Personal keepsakes, letters, trinkets. I have not opened it since his death. Poirot nodded. Then, perhaps, the time has come. He lifted the wooden box carefully and set it on the desk. The room held its breath as he opened it. Inside lay several small envelopes tied with ribbon, a pocket watch, a pair of cufflinks, and beneath them, a second journal, identical in style to the missing December volume. Lady Winterton gasped softly. Another journal. I didn't know he kept more than one. Poirot removed it gently. This one, judging by the date, contains entries from a year earlier. Ashbury leaned forward. Then perhaps it holds answers. Perhaps. Poirot agreed. He opened to the final entry. The handwriting was steady, elegant, unhurried. Poirot read aloud. I fear the truth may surface if Edward returns before I am prepared. Secrets buried must remain so, or all will be undone. Edward blanched. Lady Winterton staggered backward. What secrets? Edward shook his head wildly. I don't know what he meant. I swear. Poirot raised a hand. Do not panic. We cannot interpret a man's fears without understanding context. But clearly, Lord Winterton believed something dangerous lay between you two. Mrs. Longcross stepped closer, eyes gleaming. Then, perhaps Edward's guilt is more than emotional. Edward's voice broke. No, I never harmed my brother. I never. A sudden crash echoed from the upper floor. Everyone jumped. Poirot's eyes snapped upward, sharp as steel. The culprit, he whispered, grows impatient. Captain Vale moved instantly toward the staircase. Poirot nodded once. Yes, Captain. The time has come to confront our unseen adversary. They reveal themselves with each bold strike. He stepped forward, his voice ringing with quiet authority. Mes amis, stay close. The truth awaits above, and together they ascended into the shadows. The shadows clung to the upper landing like dark silk, pooling in corners where the candlelight could not reach. Poirot ascended with care, his hands folded neatly behind him, his head tilted with a look of sharpened calculation. Behind him followed Captain Vale, Clara, Mrs. Longcross, Ashbury, Edward, and finally, Lady Winterton. Her steps hesitant, her breath quick and unsteady. Another crash echoed from a nearby room. Poirot lifted a finger for silence, then motioned toward Lord Winterton's old study at the far end of the hall. The door stood half open, swaying faintly, as though someone had passed through only moments before. Poirot entered first. Inside, drawers had been pulled open, papers scattered. A figure stood near the hearth, rigid, trembling, one hand gripping the edge of the mantel. Lady Winterton gasped. Beatrice. Mrs. Longcross turned slowly, her expression brittle as porcelain. Eleanor, I can explain. Poirot's voice was calm, almost gentle. No need. Madame, Hercule Poirot shall do the explaining for you. Mrs. Longcross stiffened, eyes darting toward the window as if measuring the drop outside. Poirot stepped forward. From the beginning, Madame, your conduct betrayed you. Your impatience, your theatrical disdain, your eagerness to redirect suspicion. But it was not only your manner, it was the details. He held up the navy ribbon fragment from the corridor. This, Madame, was torn from your cloak. You denied it, but such vehemence is the hallmark of deceit. Mrs. Longcross opened her mouth, but Poirot raised a hand. Then there was the candle stolen, not for value, but for symbolism. Lord Winterton cherished the candle tradition, and you, Madame, were one of the few who knew the full sentimental weight it carried. You exploited that knowledge to instill fear. He began pacing slowly. You toppled the display deliberately. You stole the candle, and you burned part of it in the drawing-room hearth during the blackout, not to destroy it, but to send a message, an omen of sorts. Mrs. Longcross's composure cracked. You think I orchestrated all this madness? For what purpose? Poirot's eyes gleamed. For the journal. A hush fell. Poirot lifted the earlier journal from his pocket, the one discovered in the wooden box. Lord Winterton wrote of secrets, of unfinished matters, and he wrote that if Edward returned prematurely, everything would unravel. Why would that concern you, Madame Longcross? The color drained from her face. Poirot answered for her. Because the secret was not Edward's. It was yours. Lady Winterton gasped softly. Poirot turned toward her with gentle gravity. Madame, I am sorry, but this truth concerns your husband's past and his connection to Mrs. Longcross. Poirot looked directly at Beatrice Longcross. You and Lord Winterton were involved financially deeply. He helped cover your debts. You feared exposure. And when he died, you believed his December journal contained the evidence of your arrangement. But you did not know which volume held the confession. So tonight, you came to steal it. Mrs. Longcross shook her head violently. No, you misunderstand. Poirot pressed on. You stole the candle to create a dramatic diversion worthy of your temperament. You staged the cabinet disturbance to provoke panic. You manipulated the blackout, planted the envelope, and used the ribbon of your cloak to slip out unnoticed. Her voice broke. It was never meant to go this far. I only wanted the journal, only that. If the truth came out, I would lose everything. My estate, my reputation, my standing in society. Society, Poirot repeated gently. Madame, society forgives much, but guilt it forgives nothing. Mrs. Longcross sank into a chair, hands shaking uncontrollably. Lady Winterton looked devastated. Beatrice, how could you involve my family in your schemes? Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. I never meant to harm you, Eleanor. I thought the journal would expose me. I panicked. I needed it gone. Edward stepped forward, trembling. But the letter, the one summoning me. Poirot turned to him. Ah, Monsieur Edward, that was the one act Mrs. Longcross did not commit. The room froze. Poirot continued softly. Your letter was genuine, written by your brother before his death, Lady Winterton whispered. Poirot opened the December journal, the one still missing, but partially reconstructed now in Poirot's mind. Lord Winterton feared, above all, that his generosity and protection for Beatrice would fall unjustly upon Edward's shoulders. He wished Edward to come home quietly, discreetly, before he revealed the truth to Eleanor. He feared scandal, but he feared family division more. Edward sank into a chair, overcome. Poirot faced the group. Thus, the true tragedy is this. Beatrice sought to destroy a secret meant not to ruin her, but to protect her. In her fear, she created the very chaos her benefactor wished to prevent. Mrs. Longcross wept silently. Poirot breathed deeply and closed the journal. The enigma of the holiday candle is resolved. A theft driven by fear, a deception born of pride, and a night of theatrics that exposed the fragility of human motives. Lady Winterton stared at Poirot through tears. What happens now? Poirot inclined his head solemnly. Madame, justice must be done, but compassion may guide its hand. Speak with your solicitor. Speak with Edward, and consider what Lord Winterton himself desired most. Peace. He turned toward Mrs. Longcross. For you, madame, the law must be informed of the break-ins and theft, but mercy remains possible if you offer full cooperation. Mrs. Longcross nodded helplessly. Poirot stepped back, restoring order to his demeanor. The candle ceremony may yet continue, Madam Winterton, for remembrance is not marred by truth, only strengthened. Lady Winterton lifted a trembling candle and struck a match. As the flame bloomed, warm and steady, Poirot murmured, "In light, all shadows fade, even those cast by the past." And with that, the final mystery of Winterton Hall was laid to rest.